Hey everyone, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. It's great to see you here. As you can see, Scott is extremely excited to be here this morning.
I'm so excited
You're so
right now.
excited.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
That was your attempt
That was
to
my, yeah,
like,
that was my, I'm chipper.
Yay!
Win one for the chipper. There
Oh
you go.
my word. Yeah. It has been a taxing few weeks, I think.
It's
So
all right though, so make the most of it.
it's life, but it's tiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Which is why I'm so glad I can, sit around and just scroll on social media all day long.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, Scott.
Oh, look at that.
Quite a transition.
Yeah, that's the way it works, right?
Yeah, because we want to talk today about social media. I don't know about you or anyone listening or viewing this.
Sure.
I'm tired of talking about social media.
Sure.
Because it's been around for so long.
Yeah.
And there's been everyone from presidents to my neighbors who have opinions on social media and what it
So does
what it
Congress.
is, and they're in between.
They're in between, yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like it comes up an awful lot.
Yeah. Which is probably why it's worth at least
Which is why we need to
thinking
keep
out
talking
loud
about
on it.
Yeah, because even if I'm tired of, even if I get annoyed talking about it, it's still a pervasive presence in our lives.
Sure.
And here's the thing that annoys me.
Sure.
You have the people who don't care
Yep.
and seem to have opinions about everything, so they just
Yeah.
spout off opinions. There's the people who think it's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
Like it is the scourge of our nation.
Sure.
It's going to bring about the downfall of society.
Yeah.
And then you have the people who are like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
How does scrolling on social media, and then the people that really annoy me are like, what? You don't have the self-discipline to just put it down? and they're the people who are not on social media at all. So
Yeah.
they're like, well, I don't, but they're always
Yeah.
asking, well, what's going on?
Yeah.
Well, I just saw this on Facebook. Well, what is it? Well,
Yeah.
if you know,
Yeah. Get on Facebook and find out,
so
right? Yeah.
you're the ones that tell everybody why can't you just put your phones down?
Yeah.
But you have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
So there's there's this milieu of opinions, and I think thankfully we will have the right one.
Yeah. Oh, really?
And, yeah. in this-
Wow.
that's why we decided.
That's some pretty high,
That's
lofty
why-
goals there, Mike.
That's why I think it's good
Maybe
to
I
talk
should
about.
introduce myself to you. I'm Scott. I would not get so lofty on that one.
Well, I figured that's why we do this, is to have the right opinion.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good.
We
I
can
think
settle the
there's
argument.
another group in there too that doesn't see any problem with it, right?
Sure.
And sees the benefits of it.
Yep.
So there's a lot of different ways that people approach it. I know I have it's weird. I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I love to just veg out with it sometimes.
Yeah.
I can go time blind with it if I'm not careful. But the other part is like, I recognize that that's where a lot of people are.
Yeah.
And so if I want to be able to have some kind of connection with them, I feel like, well, I should probably at least still be on it or engaged. Like I use it with the church, try to put some things up occasionally. But I also, it's like one of those things where it's like, it's really easy to just disappear there. So I don't engage a whole lot. I have a relatively private, like, I've developed a relatively private social media thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not on a lot of different platforms. I have a few of them, but I don't really post a lot there.
Yeah.
And you can see where it stopped for me. Like, at a certain point, there used to be like, oh, this, look at my dinner, this. And then it was like, nah, oh, look, it's been 5 months, And so there's definitely, but there is an internal pull to be like, yeah, if in my role, I feel like, oh, if I manage this a little better, maybe I'd be able to, help this out. And I was talking with my son last night about it. And I even said something to the extent of, there's a lot of things that I would love to like share with people, but I also am not sharing those things so that people can think our family's great. And so I like our memories to be our memories, and so there's that weird thing of, I want people to be aware of what's happening, what we're doing, the fun things, the cool experiences, but I'm also like, not everybody knows us, and so I don't feel like they need to know all the fun things that are going
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
or the significant moments.
Now, you brought up something that I think I don't want to
No, that's
move
fine. Go
past
ahead.
too
Yeah.
quickly. The connection, connecting point.
Yeah,
That I think is what started the whole concept.
yeah.
Like there was Friendster at one
Yeah.
point. Do you remember Friendster?
I remember the name. I wasn't on
Yeah,
Friendster.
I wasn't
I
either.
remember MySpace.
I feel like Friendster was a very short-lived, like,
Yeah.
hey, there's this thing.
Yeah.
And it's called Friendster, and then MySpace took
Yep.
over. So
Yeah.
yeah, we were on MySpace.
Yep. Yeah. For a long time.
Yeah, I wasn't
I got called into a pastor's office because of MySpace.
really.
Yes. Yes.
didn't know
we'll have
that.
that conversation
Okay.
another time.
Well, dear listeners,
It wasn't any, believe it or not, it was actually, I just posted something about like talking with a different group of people around faith.
Oh, yeah.
That was like, it was like a meeting downtown. And so it was
Right, like
kind
an
of seen as
emergent
very,
church type of
yeah, it was
thing?
seen as very
Yeah.
progressive, and it created some chaos for that pastor, because some people I had mentioned that I was there, and they had leveraged my engagement or post to say that church was super progressive and super
Oh,
liberal.
wow,
And
wow.
and so it was weird, because like it was like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon
Yeah,
for chaos for that pastor. And I'm like, listen, I didn't post that for, like, I'm happy to take that down, you know? But it's just one of those, like, man, it can create all kinds of chaos. But yeah, MySpace.
MySpace,
it's
yeah.
amazing.
So that's really interesting. I didn't know
It
that.
was way more simple back then.
Yeah, I didn't really use MySpace much
Yeah,
at all.
well, that's because you were cool.
I thought all the cool people were on it.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
So we went from Friendster, which was this flash in the pan type of
Yeah.
thing. Then we went to MySpace,
Yeah.
and then Facebook took over.
Yeah. And then it just blew up.
And
from
then
there.
it's blown up from there. The big ones right now are Facebook is like our age
Yeah.
and older.
Yeah.
Because we were the early adopters of
Yep.
Facebook. And then Twitter came around. That's
Yep.
still now something
X,
else, and it's
yeah.
kind of like this messy thing. That
Yeah. Who knows what it'll be?
I have no idea I've never been on Twitter. I
Yeah.
don't engage in it at all. Instagram came around. Instagram is still the most popular among 18 to 35-year-olds.
Yeah. Oh.
And high school. Instagram, even though it's owned by Meta, which owns Facebook,
yeah.
the millennial younger generation also, they tend to look at Instagram far more than Facebook,
Yeah.
friend book.
Absolutely. Friend book.
Yeah. So there's that. So there's Instagram is still popular. Snapchat is kind of like still in that high
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
middle school.
Yep.
The
TikTok.
older you get, TikTok isn't really a social media.
Okay.
Like some people lump it into that, but TikTok and YouTube are more like entertainment mediums. But they're
But they have characteristics that
there's
still,
characteristics.
yeah.
There's the ability to connect with each other in that, and it's user produced content.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like somewhere in that line.
Yeah. It's in the gray area.
Yeah, and then there's Threads, which is Facebook, Instagram's version of
Like
Twitter.
Yeah.
And there's a few more in there. Those are the big ones
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot of like startups that are more affinity based. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
and-
so it's like, oh, you have a mutual interest around this. Well, let's have
Yep.
our own like
Yeah.
social network. It's kind of like the message boards used to be,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
the forums used to be. Like, and even I would look at forums in some ways as
Yeah,
having
like
some
Reddit.
of those
Reddit's
characteristics.
still kind of a social media
Okay.
platform.
Yeah.
And it takes all of the message board from the old days. If you don't know what
Yeah.
message boards are, those are pre-Friendster type of
Oh
things.
man, yeah.
But all of that, just to give a context for what
Yeah.
we're talking about when
Sure.
we talk about social media, it's the ability to connect
Yeah.
with other people internationally and regularly.
Yeah.
So the first question that I think that I wanted to ask though is that real connection? So we talk. That's what Facebook came out as its big push when it first was
Sure.
like, hey, reconnect with your friends.
Yeah.
And that I did that. I was like, people I didn't see
Yep.
since high school.
Oh yeah.
I reconnected with a dozen or so people.
Yeah.
But it was like, hey, what are you up to?
Okay, now we know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now there's nothing, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
and I think Facebook realized that, and they started pushing, like making different products and doing different
Yeah.
groups and doing different things to kind of make this
Make money.
connection. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll make money ultimately, but we've got a connection, but
Sure.
is it real connection? Is
Sure.
it real community?
Sure. I think okay, so there's elements of it. I'd say absolutely it's still a community. Because there is a, like, especially in some of those affinity groups where there's not necessarily a huge population.
Yeah.
And so that does become people's community. That does become people's places. I think there are some that that's one of those things that's like it's a weird dynamic for me, because that for me is that's not where I necessarily resonate. Right. But I know enough people, like even Joe, a friend of ours, like that's a massive place of connection and community, and he sees the value of that. And so that's been one of those things that, like, it can be, but it can also be just as much as an in-person community. There can be a false intimacy, a false
that's a good
dynamic
point.
that's there, that it's like, okay, well, I know about that person, and I've kind of cataloged, or there's a word that I'm thinking of, but I don't know what it is. But it's like I've presented what I want to present to this group.
Right. There's a
And
facade that you can you
yeah.
can live behind a facade.
Yeah, I've categorized it, or I've cataloged. This is my refined view of what I think, and I think one of the other things that I've also noticed, and I saw it a lot when I used to work with student ministry when it was just starting, was you could have a conversation with a kid and have known that student for years, but that student may very likely have been like how they would engage with you in person was drastically different than the persona that they would have online. And it's like you remove that social, like face-to-face interaction, and then you get sometimes ugly things, sometimes like not very thoughtful things. And so like it's like what's beneath the surface can be expressed because there's no real consequence for it. It's like a drive-by, like you just throw that, you post that, thing up, and it's like, I don't have to deal with that.
And I think that's one of the dangers.
Sure.
Of it, that when we talk about connection, we talk about community, you can have it in a virtual space to some extent, but it's a well-curated
That's
connection.
the word I was
that's
thinking
the word you were
of.
looking at?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're around, Michael.
So you curate who you are.
Sure.
And that person is doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's, to me, there is, I don't want to detract from, because I do agree that there is connection.
Yeah.
You can make connection, you can form community online, but I think it's far harder.
Yeah.
And you have to be intentionally open.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that in general people want to be that way. So
it's an interesting thought.
So when you I'll make
intentional, or
I don't think people want to intentionally be that open.
Okay.
And I'm basing that on just the experience that I've had with people in person.
Sure.
It takes a lot of time to build trust.
Yes.
So as in a pastoral role, I'll meet with somebody that might be new at the church. I've got to engage with them multiple times before they're like, oh, I think he's safe. And then I have to be open. Like I have to intentionally be vulnerable in my engagement with that person in order for them to invite them into more of a vulnerable
reciprocity
connection.
kind of a thing.
So I'm like, hey, this is my, I struggle with that too. Wow, what's your story? Here's what my story has been. Here's the frustration that I've felt. Here's the pain, or here's the joy, or here's the celebration. Like, it's in that shared experience that I start to make a real connection, and they start to feel vulnerable enough to open up a little bit and just be like, this is what's going on in my life. Here's where I'm at.
Sure.
That takes time. It takes intentionality. It takes trust on both sides. And it takes multiple times. When you have a virtual connection, you get to determine how much of, like in real life,
Sure.
you determine how much of you that other person gets to
Yeah.
see. But I think there's more of a tendency to be able to hide behind the virtuality of it, and
Yeah.
and then not be that open.
Yeah,
Um,
I would counterpoint that with like I've been around enough folks that curate an image of themselves on a Sunday,
right. In real life.
then in
yeah.
real life,
Yep.
and then like move on, and then wonder why there's no connection.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I think the community question really does come back to: Are we intentional about
Well,
it?
I think that's where I was going. I was taking way too long to get there. But
Oh,
that was
okay.
my point was in person, when you're face to face, you can only keep that persona up
Yeah.
so long.
Yeah.
You can stay
Or you have to
hidden.
remove
You have to
yourself.
remove yourself. You
Yeah.
have to remove yourself. But tell you, if I get together, you get together with somebody on a weekly basis
Yeah.
or a monthly basis,
Mhm.
and you spend an hour and a half eating breakfast with them,
Yeah.
talking, asking questions,
Yeah.
you can only keep the facade up for
Yeah.
so long before things start to
Yeah.
you start to get uncomfortable with the questions.
Yeah.
Then you have to remove yourself, or if you want that relationship, you got to stay. You got to
Yeah.
be like, well, I'm going to have to answer these questions honestly.
Yeah.
I'm going to have these conversations in an intentional way.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that online.
Yeah.
You can remove yourself. You can when every interaction is 200 characters or less, when every interaction is just little paragraphs on a screen,
Sure.
you're not looking in somebody's eyes, you're not seeing the nonverbals. I think it shapes how you connect and what connection looks like, and what connection even means in a
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, I think part of the dynamic of the social media piece that maybe this shifts the direction a little bit is it is image driven, whether it's verbal words, pictures. It's you're creating an image of
Yeah.
who you are, what your life is like, and I think as a whole, we do that. I think the gap between in-person relationship and online is not as far as I used to think it was.
Yeah, yeah,
But I do think that whether it's online or in person, it takes a massive amount of intentionality
Yeah.
to not
That's-
be untrue.
right. That's what I think is the most. That's I guess a more succinct point.
Yeah.
You have to be intentional
Yeah.
and I don't think we are naturally, as human beings, we're not naturally intentionally going to open ourselves up to that.
Yeah. I think that's a major part of where, like, I think COVID brought out the fact that if we were going to stay connected, we had to do it online.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so it was outside of your family. And so that's when I think you saw, that's when you saw people that were more naturally like, this is great,
Yeah, yeah.
and they were able to stick with it.
Yep.
You
yep.
saw some folks that they were like, I'm so glad we have this as an option. And then after about a month, they
Yeah.
were like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and we watched, you saw the different groups of people, those that resonated with it, those that didn't.
Yeah.
And for those that resonated with it, man, it was a lifeline.
Yeah, yeah.
Those that didn't, it was just a reminder that life was different and
Yeah.
they didn't like it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so sometimes that led to isolation. What I think is maybe the darker side of it is that it can still lead to isolation, and that's one of
Yeah.
the things that we were talking about when we were trying to figure out what is it that, you know, what are we
direction to
going
go
to
in
talk
this,
about,
yeah.
you know, because there's such a curated image that's there, and because ultimately, like, in some ways it's like, what are they, well, I don't know if this fits, but it's like if you're not offering the product, you are the product.
Yeah,
You know, and so there is a dynamic of, like, why do we have influencers? Why do we have you know, social media personalities? Why do we have these creators that are, you know, presenting stories that are bigger than ours?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that so many people can get lost in. It's almost like, it's like long form soap operas aren't necessary anymore.
It's a-
Short form soap
Yeah.
operas of watching people that we have some kind of connection with, or people we have no connection with, but we like what they like.
feel
or-
like there's a false connection
Yeah.
aspect to it that
Yeah.
I've been following this person for 7
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. I've watched their kids grow
Yeah,
up. I've
like
seen-
this is
Yeah.
I have a connection. They have no idea who I am.
Yeah.
But I feel a connection,
Sure.
an emotional connection. So in some ways, and that's not across the board,
Sure.
but I think you bring up an important point that in some ways social media becomes our reality TV. It's something we feel involved in.
Sure.
But there's an emotional connection that's not reciprocated.
Yeah.
And I think that can be damaging to our souls.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that might be one of the factors in like the increase in anxiety or depression. You know, and because so much of when you sit and you look at things that are well polished and well curated, you like, and there's been enough stuff that's popped out where like it's influencers like literally just manipulating situations
Yep,
to make
yep.
people like feel a certain way. Like, and so when you see so many of those different things and you look at your own life,
Yeah.
it's like, man, I'm just a failure, or I'm not, man, there's so much more I need to do. The hustle culture, the success, and
Yeah.
like, what was it? I think because I have like a 14-year-old and even a 10-year-old that I'm looking at it, it's I hear them talk about what would you like to do when you grow up, and I hear their friends, they're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't want to be an influencer.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, well,
YouTube
why is that?
personality,
Well,
yeah,
because
yeah.
they're making a ton of money.
Yep.
You know, and they get to do things that they like.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, okay. You know, and I understand markets shift, money forms
Yeah,
shift, and
yeah.
okay, so maybe that's a career path. But to me, it feels like it's like the kid that when they're little, that what do you want to be? Like when we were kids, what do you want to be? I want to be a major league baseball player. I want to be. I want to play football in the NFL. Like, okay, that's great. How many people had that dream versus how many people actually do it?
Right.
You know?
It's got that like 0.5%
Yeah.
success rate. And
Yeah.
there's
And-
millions out there that are not doing anything.
And so
making anything.
if you're sitting there and you're going, well, their life looks so great, I want that life, but they can't achieve it,
Yeah. Yeah.
then what does that do for us?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's where sometimes a curated image, whether it's online or in person, is so damaging, is because all of a sudden you begin to go, oh, that's not me.
Yeah.
You know, and in a society where, you know, it used to be that what you watched was just, it was curated on a TV. You had no interaction, no real choice in it.
Yeah.
Now you're walking around and you find something that your heart or your mind is pulled towards.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
just focus in on it. It's
Yep.
like, oh my goodness. I've seen it in people that I know and care about, where you go, you know, I don't remember you really ever struggling with this feeling of failure or
yep.
darkness before. And there's almost a sense of, you know, I used to talk to people in counseling situations and just be like, tell me how you spend your time,
Yeah.
you know? And now there's an inordinate amount of time spent on devices
Yeah.
that I think is affecting the stories that we're allowing to be told to us.
That's something that Jonathan Haidt, who's a social scientist and author,
Sure.
writes a book. He seems to write a book every couple of years because he just looks at the data and is like,
Yeah.
here's the data, here's what I'm writing about this. A book came out earlier this year or late last year, I can't remember which, called The Anxious Generation. And it was about how social media, primarily social media, is rewiring adolescents' interaction with one another.
Okay.
And it's changing the culture.
Wow.
He said, I heard an interview with him, so I haven't read the book. I should say
Oh.
that. I haven't read it. I've read about the book. I've read
Then you
reviews of the
shouldn't
book. I heard an interview with him talking about
So you're
the book.
fascinated with his content,
I
right?
just don't have time to read the book
Yeah.
because I'm on social media too much. But he said in this interview, he said that a child's engagement with the world around them
Yeah.
will drop 70% when given a device.
Wow.
So you give your kid a phone.
Or a computer, or
He tied it to phones and tablets.
Okay, phones and tablets, okay.
Because it's right in their pocket. It's always there.
yeah.
He said if you give your kid a phone, their engagement with the world around them drops 70%.
Wow,
And
that's
this is based on about 10 years of research because
Oh, wow.
iPhones became ubiquitous in 2014.
Okay.
So that's when 2014 iPhones became
They
like
became-
very
they were just
popular.
prominent,
They were
yeah.
just prominent. around between 2014, 2016, we see this curve of anxiety and depression in adolescents go like this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have looked at that as circumstantial evidence
Yeah.
that the
Correlation is
phones,
not necessarily
yeah,
causality, but
yeah. So he's saying now we have 10 years of data.
Yeah.
It's causality, and
Yeah.
that's what he's looking at.
Wow.
And his
does he
statement.
in the things you've heard, does he
Yeah.
have any kind of agenda, or is he just literally like reading the data?
He's literally a social scientist. He's
Okay.
just like, I have no, he said in the interview, I've got no stake in this. I'm just looking at the data,
Oh man.
interpreting the data, writing the books,
Yeah.
giving it, like putting it out there. And, but of course, his agenda is based on the data. So he's
Yeah.
like, stop doing this. He said,
Yeah.
in fact, he said, I think that in years to come, we'll look back at social media and devices
Yeah.
as in the same way we look back at cigarettes in the 40s and 50s.
Wow.
That we didn't think they were a big deal until all of a sudden they were a big
Yeah.
deal.
Did you ever watch the documentary, The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
I watched that and he brought that up.
Yeah.
That came out maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
old enough that it's not around, and they,
Yeah.
they have a broader definition of social media than we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, in that documentary. If you've never seen it, it's probably worth checking out if you have
Definitely worth
Netflix.
watching. Yeah.
It was one of those things I sat down with my son, who's a little bit older, and said, okay, I'd like to watch this because I
Yeah.
just want you to understand, because you're wanting to have access to a phone or a device and different things that are there. I was like, I'd like you to watch this so you understand what is
Yeah.
going on behind the scenes for like the way that they're marketing to you
Yeah.
and drawing you in.
Yep.
Because what it does is they build a case that says, and some of the stuff in it is kind of silly. It may even be offensive, but there's a lot of it that really is just looking at the programmers saying, like the guy that invented the like button on Facebook and people that invented Gmail or
Yeah.
Pinterest, like a lot of these engineers that programmed these things and why they programmed them to make you stay connected to that.
Yeah.
Like why you wouldn't pull your attention away. And if you did seem like you were pulling their attention away, the programming would start sending you things that you liked more so
Yeah.
that you would get pulled back into
Right.
like, so in a sense it's very much an addictive oriented programming.
It's the pleasure center of the brain
Yeah.
responds to this. So
Yeah.
you're getting like dopamine hits.
Yeah.
And that's part of the psychology of it.
Yeah.
The aspect that they talk about a lot in that Social Dilemma, and Jonathan Haidt talks about in his research, is that it's so hard to engage with the world around you once
Yeah.
you have that,
Yeah.
because it's tuned to keep your attention. Like you grab your phone and all of a sudden you can scroll through things
Yeah.
and you're getting these hits constantly.
Yeah.
And what we're finding psychologically is that we don't, it's kind of like I'll use a Doritos metaphor.
Oh, nice.
'Ause
I like
love
this already.
Doritos. Yeah.
Cool Ranch, please. Or the wasabi
Yeah,
ones, because those were good, but they got
so
rid of
good.
them. If you're listening, Doritos, wasabi
wasabi.
Doritos, bring them back.
Well, I don't know after I
Wasabi
talk
ranch,
about this.
yeah.
The Dorito thing is they're actually not good.
Yeah.
Like if you eat them, you want more of them.
Yes.
And that's most of the snack foods, but
Yeah.
we'll stick with Doritos for the metaphor
It's because it's tasty.
because they're my favorite.
Yeah.
So you put a Dorito in your mouth and you're like, I'm so happy now.
Yeah.
Like it's just changed everything.
yeah.
And I want another one. But what you want, what your brain wants, is not the nutritional value.
Yeah.
It's not actually chewing it and
Yeah.
swallowing it and like
It's the
absorbing it into your
flavor
body.
sensory explosion in your
what
mouth,
what
yeah.
you want is the next hit.
Yeah.
So and it literally is like some drugs affect this part of the brain the same way. You don't want to eat Doritos. You want to experience the bite.
Yeah.
It's almost like I want to feel that again the first
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So that feeling that you got when you put the first one in your
Sure.
mouth, you want to just keep feeling it.
Yeah.
That's the same thing that you have on social media.
Yeah.
The feeling that you got when you just saw that post.
Yeah.
So you're not actually engaging with anything that's there.
You're just
you
getting
just want the feeling of
The
it.
pleasure sensors
Yeah.
firing. Yeah.
Now, and this is where it becomes more dangerous than for
Yeah.
us as individuals. You're scrolling past things
yeah.
without processing
Yeah.
them.
You're microdosing.
You're microdosing the dopamine.
Yeah.
And you scroll past a joke that you think is funny, and you scroll past a video and you watch this video, and then you scroll past the news on the Ukraine-Russia
Yeah.
war
Yeah.
that so many hundreds of soldiers have just died.
Yeah.
And then you scroll past another joke,
Yeah.
and you scroll past another a life update from a
Yeah.
friend,
And then
you
Israel
scroll
and
past,
Gaza,
and then there's a war, and then there's a typhoon in Japan, and
Yeah.
then there's, I did the same like yesterday.
Yep.
I watched a stand-up comedian, and I scrolled, and I saw the typhoon in Vietnam that has caused devastation across the entire country.
Yeah.
So you're dosing this stuff, but it's like eating the Doritos. You like it, it's good.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's not nutritious.
Sure.
But like, what if every fifth one had a little bit of poison in it?
Yeah.
And made you really sick.
Yeah.
And then, but you're like, well, I need to eat another one to feel
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
And then another one was like spoiled, you know, and it's like, oh, that tastes terrible. Oh,
Yeah.
I got to eat another one. So you're just constantly feeding
Sure.
your body this stuff that's not healthy
Yeah.
for you, and not processing any of
Yeah.
it.
We when I used to work in special ed, we referred to it as like systematic desensitization.
Yeah.
Like there was an intentional process to try to help lessen reactions
Mm-hmm.
or responses to bring them from more of an extreme to a more like
Yep.
like in a way that would help them to be more successful
Yeah,
as
yeah,
individuals,
yeah.
right? And so it's interesting because the things that at times used to shock don't shock as much.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like you're almost numb to some of the things that you see.
Well, you think about, I mean, we just had a school shooting last
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
I didn't even see it come through on any of my feeds.
Hmm.
I heard about it because I looked at the news and I was like,
Wait, what?
what?
Yeah.
Now, I remember, this is horrific to say I remember other school shootings,
Yeah.
but I remember when there were other incidences
Yeah.
of shootings and people were like, prayers, I can't believe this happened.
Yeah.
Like even an argument. I looked through social media and I'm like,
Yeah.
somebody argued about gun control. You know,
Yeah.
I used to get
Yeah.
really annoyed
Yeah.
with all of the armchair
Backs and
experts
forths, yeah.
arguing and going
Yeah.
back and forth. Now I'm looking at it and it's like there's not even a mention
Yeah.
of this. So that says that's a whole different side
Dynamic,
of
yeah.
society. But to think that we are at a point where we're that desensitized in our culture that these things aren't even registering on our
Yeah.
social media. It's
Yeah.
kind of like we just keep going.
Yeah, well, and
just
then
keep
there's that
going.
other side thing of like we talked about curating your own image,
yep.
right? Your algorithm is curated for you,
Right.
and so
yeah.
if you're always watching like joke stuff, you don't necessarily get
Yep.
all of the different news. Or if
Yeah.
you're watching sports things, I see it all the time, even to the degree of like on some apps where if it's like, oh, you have one thing, well then like the suggested things are like all that, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
It's like advertisements of,
Yep,
you know,
yep.
you look up heated grips for your motorcycle and now all you see is heated grips for your
Yeah,
motorcycle. And
yeah.
it's like, oh, and it happens on social media as well.
And that's going back to your reference to the social dilemma.
Yeah.
That was the main point of
Absolutely.
that was this is the algorithm is fed by anger.
Yeah.
It's not fed by positive
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Because positivity doesn't keep you connected.
Yeah.
It's the negativity. It's the anger.
Yeah.
Like people respond to anger.
Yeah.
So
Intense emotions. is
yeah.
what people-
So if there's an intensity on your news feed or on
Yeah.
whatever you use, if there's some sort of intensity there,
Yeah.
then the companies know that you respond to that, and
Yeah.
so to keep you glued to it, it's just going to continue to feed you
Yep.
stuff, and then
Yeah.
that's where we get into the echo chamber problem.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And I think that's again, one of those things is I think there's the microdosing, the feeling like, oh, I want to see more, right? I think there's also like there's a desire and a curiosity we have to know what's going on around us
Yeah, yeah.
without necessarily having to engage it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've talked before
We don't
about
have to process
Yeah.
it because we can
yeah,
shut it off. Then
because
yeah.
it's that's somewhere else.
Yeah.
And yet, like I said, we've talked about these in different aspects, but I don't think that we were made or intended to have as much access to world knowledge as we do right now.
yeah.
Like
yeah.
there's we do have limits for a reason as humans, and
It's
we
the
just
emotional and mental
yeah,
limits to
yeah.
what we can actually handle and process.
and I think
yeah.
we've just kind of we don't even think about them really.
Yeah, yeah.
We just consume, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and we feel that it's almost like the withdrawal of when we don't know what's going on. It's like, oh, I had no idea, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's a lot of that other pressure I think, for us in it as well. I also was thinking through as you were talking about like that pleasure piece, like, and so you keep looking for those moments of like, oh, that's an interesting thing, that's a funny thing, that's a frustrating thing, that's a whatever. There was another thing, a study that I had seen, and I wish I had the source for it for you, but they were talking about the reduction in attention spans of society as a whole.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, even to the point now where I think it was like they were comparing the attention span of the average like teenager to like that of a goldfish,
Like a
where
10-second type
it's
of-
like 3 or something like that, where they keep seeing a reduction in the ability for focused concentration across society, which, okay, great. I see that with my kids until they find something they're fascinated with, and then they're laser focused on it for days, you know?
Yeah.
So that's not my major concern. But what I do think is a fascinating thing is from a faith leader perspective.
Yep.
So much of our formation as Christians is rooted around the ability to not be distracted and to focus and to be present in a moment. And if we're conditioning ourselves for the easy moment of like, oh, that was enjoyable. Oh, that was enjoyable. Oh, that was enjoyable. Like, there is something that is not necessarily enjoyable when you're learning to sit in silence and to be in prayer. And you're like, oh, and I mean, you probably have had the same experience. I don't know how to do this, and it just feels like it's wrong. Like, it's so boring, or it's so frustrating. And it's like, okay, yes,
It's supposed to be.
There's a moment of like you go through the struggle of silence and resting. And you begin retraining yourself to be able to listen. That is like, it takes effort. And if we are, and this goes to so many different areas of our lives, but what we consume, what we cultivate in our lives affects the way that we engage in our faith and our relationship with God and our walk with God. The things that we focus on affect the way we respond to people, the way that we care about them. And so, and there's so much extreme in the angers that I see on social media, the back and forth, that it's like, man, as Christians, like, okay, like the extremes are always really risky. And so how do we engage in social media in a way that doesn't undermine our faith? I think, again, ready? Here's where it started, right? We've got to be really intentional. Like, it as much as intentionality is critical to build community online, as much as building community in person takes an extreme amount of intentionality, our faith takes an extreme amount of intentionality. And I'm always curious, like, how much time do I spend on my phone? And at least with our phones, I get a screen time report every week. And it tells me how much time I spent on that phone on an average, on a daily basis, and which apps I use and how long I use those apps. And there are some weeks where it's really encouraging, and there are some weeks where I go, that was really, like, that's gonna get in the way. That's gonna get in the way. But I never used to think that way. And so getting to a spot where I've started to process, like, okay, like, sometimes I'm listening to audiobooks, sometimes I'm listening to, things that I think are redoming and beneficial. And so I can look at that and go, okay, this week I spent a lot of time.
This is what I was doing.
I spent a lot of stuff there. And then some weeks it's like I was doom scrolling. I was super stressed out. Why was so? Then there's a cue to me to go
recognizing what's going on internally that's pushing you in that direction.
So it becomes like I look at a screen time report, for me at least, as like, oh, I at least have the area code or the zip code for where my heart's at that week. And some weeks it's just more convenient to not look at it because I know where it's at.
And I think that's important for us, because I don't want to say all social media is bad. Like, I don't want to, and here's kind of I haven't heard anyone saying this. I don't know if it's a hot take or if I'm just not paying
Well,
attention.
I can't wait.
I think that social media just magnifies what's already been there.
Absolutely.
So it's like there's always been lots of bad things in the world.
Sure. Yeah.
There's always been angry people in the world.
Yeah.
There's always been extremes on the right or the left or wherever.
Yeah.
All of the things that we have seen, there's always been superficial people
Yeah.
trying to say, like, sell
Sure.
their way of life or
Yeah.
whatever. Anytime, anything we see on social media, it's nothing new. We haven't seen anything new yet.
Yeah.
But what we have seen is a concentration of it in such a way that we have never, as a society, we've never had to process
Sure.
the concentration
Yeah.
of anger, evil,
Yeah.
discouragement, pain,
Yeah.
all of the negative things that have always been in the world. Now they're in one spot,
Yeah.
and I can see them constantly.
Yeah. So, random question then for you: how do you guard your heart?
Well, that's
that.
that I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
That's where what I wanted to go to. I think it's for to go off of what you were saying. Like this, you look at your screen time and you look at what you're doing and just go, why?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Like, I think so many issues in our lives could be not solved, but at least moved forward if you just said, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why did I spend
Yeah.
4 hours today looking at this phone?
Yeah.
Why did I not have anything else to
Yeah.
do? Like,
Yeah.
was I that bored?
Yeah.
Or do I need something to distract me from the frustration in my own life?
Yeah.
Am I that discouraged that I needed to see someone else's life and try to live vicariously through them?
Yeah.
Did I just need entertainment?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember back in the 80s when TV was ubiquitous,
Yeah.
and then the statistics came out, like the average
Yeah.
family watches 8 hours of television
Yeah.
a night because they
Yeah.
come home from work, turn it on, and it's just
Yeah.
on until
It's weird
bed, and-
because that's what I was thinking of. Is like the TV was always on.
yeah.
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 And then when like all the 24-hour
Now
news
there's
stations
24-hour
came on,
news, yeah.
it was like, oh, the TV's always on.
Yeah.
Right? But there was a weird dynamic that I experienced, at least. The TV was always on. That didn't mean we were always there.
Yeah.
But the phone,
You're always there.
you're there.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah.
like it's like, ooh.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think that it's important for us to not say, well, I'm just cutting out all social
Yeah,
media.
absolutely.
Like, if you want to, there is nothing bad that's going to happen if you do that.
Yeah.
There's nothing. I feel like I can unequivocally say,
Yeah.
from my perspective, there's nothing negative that will happen to you or
Yeah.
to your community or in your life
Yeah.
if you cut out social media. That being said, I think it's an extreme measure that you don't have to
Yeah.
do, as long as you are aware of what's going on internally.
Yeah.
As long as you can honestly say, why am I doing this? Why am I scrolling through this?
Yeah.
What is going on in my life
Yeah.
or internally that's pushing me to use this as an outlet?
Yeah.
If I don't have connection with real people around me,
Yeah.
am I substituting the community that I could have
Sure.
for a virtual community that I can curate?
Yeah.
You don't get to choose, often, you don't get to choose who you engage with in real life.
Yeah.
It just is, and you have to adjust to it.
Yeah.
When you're in an online community and somebody makes you mad, you can block them, and you're
Yeah.
like, I no longer
Yeah.
have to resolve this
Yeah.
relationship.
I know I can silence them
Yeah.
so that I don't have to see what they're thinking
Yeah.
or whatever. Right?
So there's a lot of ways that a virtual presence is so much under your control that
Yeah.
you don't have to examine yourself.
Sure.
But that's the intentionality. That's where the intentionality comes
Yeah.
in, is I need to examine these things.
Yeah.
What is happening in my own heart, in my own life? And as an adult, now you think about your kids, or you
Yeah.
think about the kids in the schools that you work in, or
Yeah.
in your churches,
Or in your neighborhood.
in your neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Those kids are not being taught how to examine themselves internally and ask those questions.
Yeah.
Because most adults don't know how to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still new for us.
Yeah.
We're learning how to do that.
Yeah.
So I think the safeguard for me is, if I find myself absorbed in some sort of social media, or whatever it is I'm doing incessantly,
Yeah.
I need to recognize it, ask the question, what's going on internally,
Yeah.
and I've put stops on it. Like I
Mhm.
have a 90-minute. I think it's 90 minutes for every social media app on my phone. It's
Mhm.
like that's the limit. So if
Yeah.
I hit and when I hit the you have 5 minutes left thing
Yeah.
that pops up, I go, what have I been doing?
Yeah.
Like what's going on with me today
Yeah.
that has caused me to spend
Mhm.
90 minutes throughout the day on Facebook? Like
Yeah.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the way you described. I had a conversation with someone within the last week, even that was talking to me about social media and their use and why they spend a lot of time there, but they also wanted to go and exercise, and and
Yep.
they were like, I would love to ride 100 miles a week on my bike.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting thing. And eventually, throughout the conversation, they said, because I feel like when I'm exercising, I'm getting away from the things that are uncomfortable in my life,
Mm.
and
Mm.
and I just want to run away from them.
Yeah.
And so I said, why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you feel like that?
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have an answer for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think you need to spend some time and come up with a reason why you're doing those things, or why what you're running from and why you're running from it, because those things don't go away.
Mm-hmm.
They show up just at the end of your 100 miles and you're exhausted and now you have to deal with them.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so it's better to
Mhm.
start asking those questions and addressing what's going
Yep.
on beneath the surface
Yep. Yep.
than just like, and people, there's a variety of things that people cope with the internal stuff with.
Yeah.
Some it's exercise, some
Yep.
it is
Yep.
social media, some it is like whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
it's distraction.
Whatever it is, it's a distraction from what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Or it's just too uncomfortable to be in silence,
Mhm.
and so
Because when
it's-
you're in silence, everything that's going
Yeah.
on internally suddenly is right
It's right
there.
there, yeah.
Because there's no distractions.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
it's so hard.
Yeah, and I think like that intentionality, that even if we could become a people that ask,
Mhm.
like, why am I here?
Yeah.
Like, and some days you just go, because I'm tired and I feel like watching
Yeah.
something that's
Yeah.
funny.
I just want to laugh for
Yeah.
the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I don't think there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if that is literally the pattern every day, okay, well, wait, why?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on beneath the surface that is like, what, why aren't you doing some of the things that you tell me you want to do?
Right. Right.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
so again, it's that intentionality and that awareness.
Mhm.
I know awareness was a major factor in me starting to get a grip on social media. And I talked about screen time, but like,
Yeah.
I made it a game for me to see how low I could get like my usage.
Yeah. Yeah.
For a long time.
Mhm.
And I feel like even in this conversation, I'm like, I probably should get back to some of that gamifying of things, because I'm so busy most days that I don't have a lot of time.
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
I'm always amazed that I seem to manage to have found time.
Then you look at it and you're like,
Like, wait,
where did
what?
I find
Yeah.
that 45
Yeah,
minutes?
exactly. And
where
so
was
it's like,
that?
well, that could have been, somewhere else that,
Yeah.
God, I had to take from another area of
Yep,
life
yep.
to be there.
I think
know?
that's a good place to. Well, what you said is really important. It's a good. We have to wrap up.
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
I do want to say, what you said there is really important. That you're taking time from something. Like if you look at time every day, you have a certain amount, and for the people that say, oh, I wish I could work out.
Yeah.
I would like to ride my bike.
Yeah.
I'd like to spend more time with my kids.
Yeah.
I'd like to spend more time with my spouse. I'd
Yeah.
like to do. There's all of these things that you could do. First, take a look at your screen time.
Yeah.
Did you spend an hour
Yeah.
scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or Facebook? Like that hour was taken from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that most of the time it's in 10-minute increments. So
Yeah.
it's not fair to say you spent an hour.
Yeah.
But I think it is telling that there are many things that we wish we could do or
Yeah.
want to do. And when you look at the amount of time you've spent on a device
Yeah.
doing something, well, maybe you could figure out how to manage that time better.
Yeah.
And actually accomplish the things that you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So in all of this, as a summary to
Yeah.
wrap up, I think that we could say that social media is a tool
Yeah.
that can be addictive.
Yeah.
It's valuable and it's important for our culture right now. I could see it. I could see a time where there's a backlash against it.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like returning back to offline.
Yeah.
Which is
There's
kind of
some of the rumblings
there's
of
a
that.
yeah there's a it's a small movement now, and usually those small movements get bigger over the decades. But for right now, social
Yeah.
media is a cultural tool, and I think it needs to remain in that
Yeah.
under that in that area
Yeah.
of just being a tool.
Yeah.
Don't let it control you.
Yeah.
And you let it control you when you're not being intentional about your
Yeah.
time, and when you're not asking that question,
Yeah. When you're
why
not
am I
aware.
doing this?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
why am I continuing to do
Yeah.
this?
AI, awareness and intentionality, fixes everything.
AI, yes. Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Yeah, that's next week.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about that
Yeah,
to
me
even talk
either.
about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you guys for joining us on Rough Cut Faith. It
Absolutely.
is really good to talk about these things. I think it's important for us. I think it's important for us to process them and to understand how it affects us internally, how it affects our faith, how it affects how we engage with one another. And I really feel like we just barely scratched the surface of this conversation. But I would encourage you to look up Jonathan Haidt and that the book on the anxiety, the generation of anxiety, or the anxious generation.
Yeah.
Take some time to engage with that. I want to read it. Maybe we'll do a review on it if
Yeah,
we can
maybe.
get to read it sometime
Yeah.
soon. But anyway, thanks. If you want to interact with us on social
media. Yeah.
You can leave a comment on YouTube. You can write to us. You can go to discoverthegrove.com.
Yeah.
Fill out an information or a communication form there. Write to us, ask questions, give us ideas for topics if you want us to address anything.
Yep.
We'd love to interact with you that way.
Awesome.
Hope you have a great week.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.